Hey BookTube! Welcome back to my channel. I am the Book Mage, and today we are getting into the worst books that I read in 2023. So while I think I had like a really mediocre reading year, I didn't actually read that many horrible books. So that's why I've decided to put both my most disappointing books and my actual worst books of the year both into one video, because otherwise it would just be like two really short videos, and I'd rather just get all the negativity over and done with in one video, in one place. So that's what we're doing. So I'm going to start out by going through the books that I thought were the most disappointing things that I read this year, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the book itself is bad, it just means that I had higher expectations for it than what it actually turned out to be. So some of these may be books that I still kind of gave like a decent rating, but I just wanted more, I expected better, and so ultimately there was disappointment. The first of the disappointing books is going to be Any Way the Wind Blows by Rainbow Rowell. This is the last book in the Simon Snow trilogy, and God, I hope it's the last one, because I'm not reading anymore. If she extends it again, we're not doing it. This is in my disappointing pile because I loved book one. Book one is it's a play on like the Harry Potter fanfiction trope, and I really enjoyed book one. It was like one of the first books I ever read on my actual BookTube channel when I first started. So like I had a soft spot for this series. Book two wasn't great. It was entertaining, but like not great, and it was really short and really weird and cut off. So like I was thinking, okay, book three, this is gonna be like the big fun finale. It was just so bad. It dragged on so much. This book just like, it just kept going. It just kept going. It just seemed to drag. I didn't care about any of the characters. We went from having like this fun magical school setting to this being basically a contemporary where a couple of the characters can do magic. Every single thing this book was doing was just centered around contemporary literature issues, like relationship stuff. I just didn't care. I was so past it at that point. I find it really hard to relate to these characters now, which is sad because I loved book one. So yeah, I thought this could have been like a fun end to the series. Oh, no. I think the issue is, while the book isn't necessarily bad, it's hard to judge because I really did not enjoy it and I couldn't really see anything much to like about it, but I think it's just because I do not enjoy like contemporary fiction of like this type, even with the fantasy light elements. So like, I'm sure the book is enjoyable to some people, it's just so not for me. It's just so not my thing. I thought we were gonna get back to the magic school setting. We just didn't. We just spent so much time in pubs and in discussions and eating cake and apartment hunting, and I just don't care. Oh, I just don't care. Okay, this next one hurts a little bit more than that actually. The next disappointing book that I read this year, don't hate me, it is The Sword Defiant by Gareth Hanrahan. Now I want to preface this by saying I love Gareth Hanrahan's writing. He's one of my like auto-buy authors, which is why when I found out he was doing a new series, I had to pick this up immediately. This was like one of my top like most hype books to read of this year, and I did read it quite shortly after it came out, and I guess like the premise, I kind of like it. It's very kind of like D&D, feeling like D&D inspired. You're following a guy who was part of like a band of adventurers who defeated like the big bad many years ago, but since they're all now in like positions of power, it's kind of getting like very political, very like council meeting-y, and there's like stuff stirring again, but it's not like the old days of just grab a sword, go out, defeat big bad. It's kind of like, oh, we're like the people in charge now. We're not just like this ragtag group of like adventurers who can just go out and do stuff. Everyone's changed, everyone's different, and the concept is really good. Also, the guy has an evil talking sword. 10 out of 10. I think this just fell down for me. I didn't really connect with the world. I didn't really get into any of the characters. I kind of like the dynamic between like one of the, I guess, POV characters and like a side character, but it just wasn't really enough to keep me invested. I think I gave this like a 3 stars because there was nothing really bad about it. It was taking like a classic trope and doing something new with it, but it didn't feel new enough. It still felt a little bit generic, and it did kind of feel like somebody almost just like recounting in a more played up sort of way something that happened in like one of their actual campaigns, as opposed to like going ahead and writing a book. Like it didn't seem to have this. I was kind of expecting like not like a hero's journey or something, but there was a lot of like, we kind of stayed in the same place all of the time. There's a lot of like back and forth between locations, and I don't know, I'm kind of holding out hope for like maybe book 2 will be better, but it just, yeah, it didn't kind of hit the dark angsty vibes that I was kind of like getting from like the cover and the synopsis. I know that Gareth Hanrahan can write a book that I love. Like, I know it. He's a good writer. So I fully intend to continue with this series. I'm thinking book 2 will probably like be like a make or break for me. Either the series will hit its stride or it won't, and I'll just have to like DNF it. But safe to say, I thought this could have been like a 5-star prediction, and while it wasn't bad by any means, it just like, it wasn't a 5 stars. Like, thinking you're gonna get a potential 5 stars and it being a 3 stars, oh, yeah, it was not great. The next book on my list of disappointments was A Dowry of Blood, and this is by S.T. Gibson. This is kind of like a Dracula's Brides retelling. This is mainly focusing on the relationship of one of the brides to Dracula, who was never actually named, and to two of his other brides. I had thought this would be like a sweeping sort of gothic, historical, like really dark, really indulgent vampire novel, and like it just was not. It is gothic in the way of like just the trappings of the genre, I guess. It technically is gothic, but it didn't feel, I don't know if it's because I'm goth 365 days a year, but like it didn't feel very goth to me. Like, it's gothic literature, but like this is vampires and Dracula's castle, and I had just thought this would go like I thought it would go all out on it. I thought this book would go like ham with like the imagery and the scenery, the settings and like the language, and it's it's just so turned down. It's dialed all the way down. It's so focused on the relationship and like the personal feelings and like the interpersonal drama, and like I never thought any of that was done badly or poorly. I thought the book was well written. I just so want almost this exactly again, but just play it all the way up. Give me more vampire. Like it was almost inconsequential, the vampireness of this vampire book, where every major character is a vampire. Almost didn't matter. Like, Dracula's in this book, and like it just didn't matter. I don't know. I wanted vampire vibes and I didn't get any, and that's why this disappointed me. Like, I thought this could be like a new vampire favourite. It was a fine book, but that's all it was. I'm still salty about it. More disappointing vampires. The Vampire Lestat. The Interview with the Vampire is like, it's my official favourite book of all time. I love it. I give it 5 stars every time I read it. It's just, this is the sequel, the direct sequel, right? And it's kind of set both before, like a prequel discussing how Lestat, who was a character in Interview with the Vampire, sort of came to be a vampire, and then it's also got some after bits. I don't really want to go into spoilers in terms of like, it jumps all over the timeline. It's hard to be both a prequel and a sequel, and I can't really say anything because of potential spoilers for book 1. It's really hard for me to say exactly what I wanted out of this book without getting into spoilers. I will say the first, maybe like third-ish of this book was 5-star quality to me. I was loving it. I was so into it. I think the only way I can say it without spoilers is this is meant to be the story of Lestat's life, and he's a character that I very much like and I'm very much interested in, but I think, as I said in like one of my reading vlogs when I read this, it turns out that so much of Lestat's life is him sitting down quietly while a completely different vampire we have just met tells Lestat their entire life and how they became a vampire and everything they know about vampires and vampire lore and the origin of vampires and like all of Anne Rice's world building, and Lestat just listens to it, which means that we as the reader have to read it, and there are hundreds of pages of just other vampires talking at me, and I'm so not into it. I came here thinking this was going to be the Vampire Lestat, and it turned out this was the Vampire Lestat gets a history lesson in the origins of vampire kind. I just so don't care. I just so don't care. I really didn't like the ending to this book, so I think I give it like a 4-ish stars overall because like the beginning was so good. Yeah, I think I've said I'll read the 3rd one in this series and then no more. I have no intent to go past that. The sequel to like my favourite book ever, and it had such a promising beginning, and then to do that to me, no, absolute not. Unforgivable. And the last book that I'm going to put on my disappointments list, which is another one that I didn't think was bad, I just expected to love it. I could have never read this book and I would feel no different, and it's Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. Now this is set in a world, it's like, it follows a girl who lives in this magical library, and all the books there are kind of like these almost like slightly malevolent entities, like they can potentially turn into like these monstrous forms. All the books are just kind of sentient and a bit weird, and like there are demons in this world, and like the primary male character is like a magician, like a mage, like a wizard. This book had everything that I should like in it, and I like so many of the character archetypes. I was reading this book, it was kind of like, I imagine it's like if you're eating a meal that you know you love but you just can't taste anything, and you're like, why can't I taste it? These are all my favourite things. I just didn't get into it. I think it's because partly it's YA, so partly like if I need it to hit like a here, it was kind of like always down here, which is unfortunate. You think I'd at least get something out of it. Like I can enjoy stuff like Six of Crows, and this should have hit some of those beats. It just did not. I don't know why. It's like the ghost of this book just sort of passed through me and went on its way. I had the same emotional reaction reading this as like staring at a blank wall, and I don't know why. I literally can't tell you why. I think maybe my brain just switched off. Maybe it's like a me issue. That is very possible. But yeah, massively disappointed. Like, this book has everything in it that I should like. Short of one dragon and one vampire, this book has everything in it I could possibly want. But how did we get here? Okay, so from there, we're going to go on to my actual worst books that I read this year that I hated and that I wish I hadn't read. So, the first one I won't talk about too much because it was a DNF, and I've talked about it a lot already, and it was The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart. I picked this up because I was trying to like branch out into different genres. Stupid move on my part, I know. And it's written by the host of, or one of the hosts of, the Morbid podcast, which I do enjoy, or like I listened to a lot of it like at the start of the pandemic, so like I guess I enjoy it. This book was just, oh, I mean, you could tell it was a debut. It was just, you're following both a person investigating a serial killer and also the serial killer's POV. Massive issue number one. Being in the serial killer's head should have felt creepy, threatening, like you should have felt discomforted to be in that person's frame of mind, because obviously they're doing horrible things. They should have this horrible like worldview, and the way the author did this was just to make him sort of like weirdly quirky. Like, he doesn't like certain genres of music, he's a bit stuffy, he doesn't like when things are loud, he doesn't like people that shout in his house when he has them tied up to a chair. It just feels like an old lady. And then I think in his head at one point, like, he talks poorly about the appearance of a woman who's just like doing her job, and it's like, is this really how you're gonna characterize your villain? As just like, he's halfway between like a stuffy old man that writes to the council all the time and like some sort of neckbeard redditor. Like, how is that your serial killer? I'm meant to be afraid of this man? His name is Jeremy. Get out. And on the other hand, the woman investigating was just like info dumping, like trying to like explain to you what certain parts of like the forensic process are and stuff, and like things that the people around her who obviously work with her should already know, and it was so clear that it was just for the reader's benefit. But if you read this genre or you listen to this person's podcast, you should already be really familiar with those terms anyway. And also Google exists, so like it just felt patronizing and weird. It felt like it was written by a child, and it's disappointing. But also, I had to DNF this. I think I got like 50 pages in. It was just so bad. It was mind-numbingly bad. I could not bring myself to read another page. If I'd finished this, I would have given it 1 star. Like, I wish the author all the best in like her future endeavors, but this was so bad. Okay, the next worst book that I experienced this year. I read this one way back. This is like a fever dream. It was like way back in February, I think, and I was doing a challenge where I try to listen to as many audiobooks as I can in a week. I'm not even an audiobook person. I like to read physically, but this was like another challenge to myself. And again, challenges don't work well for me. I ended up picking up this very generic older YA. Oh, it was bad. It was Three Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake. I read 2 books at the same time, this and The Queen's Rising, that are basically like, it feels like the same book, to be honest. They're different stories, but like, it might as well be the same book. But this one stood out to me as being worse, because while I like the concept better, it's kind of like, well, the concept doesn't make sense, to be honest. It literally makes no fucking sense. There's this world where the current reigning queen will always she'll give birth to 3 daughters. She immediately then leaves this island, packs it off, leaves, goes who knows where. I'm sure that's a future plot point that I don't care about. Those 3 girls will each get one of 3 powers. One will have poison powers, one will have like nature powers, and one will have like elemental powers. And if one of those sounds better than the others, you're so right. And they go off into these 3 factions. So there's like a poisoner faction, an elemental-y faction, a nature faction, and they all will campaign for the next like 16 years or however old they wait for the teenage girl to get so she can be female fantasy protagonist. It's like 16 years or something. They raise them while like campaigning between each other, like, oh, who's gonna get the throne? But it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, 2 of these girls will die in like these trials, like these face-offs against each other, and one of them will live and she'll become the queen. And then she'll immediately like get married, have 3 babies, and then she'll leave. And my question is, what is the point in having a queen if she just leaves? If they're babies the whole time, who the fuck is governing the country the rest of the time? What's the point? I don't get it. I don't care. I don't care if this is explained in a future book. I don't care. I don't care. Like, my whole thought is it's probably set in like the modern world. This is like a weird experimental island or some dumb shit like that, to be honest. Like, I don't know. It's a weird stupid book. And I don't care. This book had so many characters because you have 3 female main protagonists, like 3 of them. So every single one has to have the best friend and a love interest and like, I don't know, some other like side characters. Oh, and like a mentor and like somebody else and like an antagonisty type person. And it's like they have to have all the characters that in a regular YA, one female protagonist might have like 5 people around her, so you only have to keep track of like 6 or 7 characters throughout the book. This one had like 5 characters per girl, and like trying to, because they're all the same person. One mentor is the same as like the next mentor, and I'm like, it's so hard for me to try and keep track of like all these different side characters who are barely ever there because we're getting one book told from 3 different almost identical perspectives. This book was an absolute clusterfuck of pointless characters and just pointless plot points, and like it's so, I figured out the twist from page 1. I'm so sorry if you care, I'm gonna spoil it now, but like the girls were like switched at birth. They definitely were, because you immediately get the poison girl on like the first chapter. She's not immune to poisons, and it's like, well, obviously not. She probably has one of the other powers, and one of the other girls is also not good at like nature powers, and it's like, okay, well, I'm so sorry, but you've probably been switched at birth. Like, someone fucked up. I do not know how this was like a booktube favourite. I genuinely do not know how people back in the day were reading this. This book was awful. I'm gonna be really quick for the next one. The next one that I read, After Dark by Haruki Murakami, again from my audiobook challenge. I could literally just talk shit about Murakami all day. If he's gonna write a book, he's gonna write an aloof male main protagonist who is himself, who is gonna have such a niche eclectic music taste, and who's gonna sleep with so many women, but he's just gonna be so like aloof and uncaring about it, and it's like, okay, is that it? Are you gonna have like a female character who's just sort of like weird and quirky just to like fulfill some sort of like weird sexual fantasy for the main character, and then there's probably gonna be like a load of like weird voyeuristic stuff in the middle, which there is, and then for some reason just like a load of nonsensical, pointless, kind of magical realism but kind of not. It's just nonsensical for the sake of being nonsensical. Are we gonna resolve anything in this book? No, not really. Why did I read it? Did I get anything out of it? No. Was there a point to this book? No. Was there a message? I don't think so. I don't know what else you want me to say. I've read 2 of his books now and they've both felt the same. So this one was even worse. The other one was Sputnik Sweetheart, which was like, that had an egregious nipple scene, but like this was still mind-numbingly boring and mind-numbingly bad. I like other Japanese literature, so it's not that. I just think he's a bad writer. I just think he's bad. Okay, the last 2. They get a joint place on this list because I do not want to talk about them separately because I've done so much already. You all know what this is. It's Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. I'm gonna have to like lean over here so I can put these glossy JPEGs in. What to even say? I think if you add up all the time I have talked about this series this year, it's probably like 4 to 5 hours worth of me just ranting. I really can't do it again. This book has some of the worst world building I've ever seen in any book. It's almost like we're on TV sets, like there's set dressing, there are locations, but they don't connect to anything. They're just cardboard cutouts of places you expect to see in a fantasy. It's bad. There's only 2 characters that matter. Dragons, wasted potential. The lore, the plot, just non-existent. Absolutely non-existent. The writing style is awful. It's like, let me write this YA high fantasy with porn in it, and let me make sure to write it the way that I think an adult thinks that teenagers write like blog posts or something. They have to say like fuck every page. They always say, oh, something or other for the win. I can't take this. I can't take this. I can't take that level of cringe. So many chapters end with just dramatic statement. Fuck. Please stop. Please actually stop. This is gonna have so many books to it. They drag on. It wasn't meant to be a pun. The reason they have dragons in this book, they do drag. So much of this just does not make sense. The second book has the worst final paragraph I've ever read in any book ever. I was genuinely didn't think I was reading it right. I was equal parts laughing and dying inside. Genuinely one of the worst things I've ever read. I can't actually begin to explain to you how bad it is. There's a reason that I have like a 2-hour rant on the second book, and I think I've ranted a lot about the first book. I think I have like 3 hours of talking about these books just on their own videos, plus like all the shit from vlogs and wrap-ups. I can't talk about these books any longer. I want to go into 2024 never having to mention these again. I'm so sick of them. I'm so tired of them. I hate that they exist. I've got to get away from these books. I've got to end this video because like I can't talk about these books anymore. Like, I know I'm supposed to tell you more about like why I hated these books, but just know that I hated them so much. Just know that I hated them so much. I can't do it anymore. I can't talk about these books anymore. I'm so sick of it. after that minor breakdown, those are all the books that I read this year that either disappointed me or just irked me beyond belief with the fact that they exist. I don't want to jinx it. I'm not really sure how much worse 2024 could get in terms of like the quality of some of these books. I mean, only time can tell, but like I'm really hoping this is the last year where I have to read things like this. so yeah, those are the worst books that I read this year. Please feel free to let me know in the comments the worst books that you read this year. And if you made it this far, leave me like a little red flag. I should have seen some of the red flags coming for some of these books, and I should have just not read them. Maybe that's on me. I still feel like I want to blame the books though. I still feel like I want to blame the books. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this has been enjoyable, entertaining, informative, in case you were thinking about picking up any of these books. And if you're not a fan of this much negativity, my next video should be the best books that I read, so hopefully that will balance everything out. So with that said, I hope you guys are all enjoying the end to 2023 and hopefully reading something good, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!